In May of 1999, 19-year-old Katie Poirier went missing from a Moose Lake convenience store where she was working alone as a night clerk. A grainy black and white surveillance video captures a man with his arm at the back of Katie's neck as he forces her out of the store.
He said Katie Poirier was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Of course, the question tonight is, where is Katie Poirier?
What would unfold within the next few months would shock and disgust Minnesota, along with the nation.
After that happens, what do you do? Calling for a body in a fire pit. I started firing.
In this episode of Aren't You the Girl, I'll be covering the homicide of Katie Poirier and the courageous work of her family, who fought to set in place Katie's Law.
Donald Blum may have killed her, but he never got her soul.
Katie's story has been told numerous times within American true crime culture and media. She's been covered on episodes of Forensic Files, On the Case with Paula Zahn, See No Evil, and more, including countless podcasts. Her case is nationally known for the incredible forensic science used to convict the man guilty of her murder, Donald Blum. Technically, Donald was convicted without Katie's body, which is extremely rare, and the first of its kind. It also brought an end to the trend of perpetrators abducting convenience store workers in rural Minnesota. Not only did forensic technology catch up with Donald's crimes, but technology in general, like surveillance cameras. I cover a lot of cases where unfortunately the victims don't get the coverage they deserve, or the funds towards their case to adequately investigate it. Katie Poirier is a case of the justice system and the media all working well together, the way it should be working for every victim. The Poirier family fought for the public's rights afterwards, which saved many future victims by tightening up our sexual offender laws. As Dakota County Attorney James Backstrom said in response to the case, Blum is a classic example of a person with a criminal history that led to changes for patterned and sexually dangerous offenders that now exist in Minnesota law. Katie was working at a Conoco convenience store. The store sits by itself, a few hundred feet away from Interstate Highway 35 on the southern outskirts of Moose Lake. Its round-the-clock hours and large driveway made it a popular spot for truckers. Katie had just started her night shift, and about a half an hour later, customers notified police that the store was unattended. This was about 11:40 p.m. Katie's denim shirt, checkbook, and car keys were left behind. The store was completely empty. No money or merchandise appeared to be missing from the store. At about 1:50 a.m., Pam and Steve Poirier received a phone call that Katie was missing from the store. The family left Mankato at 2:30 a.m. and were in the convenience store parking lot by 6 a.m. that morning, desperate to find Katie. A grainy black and white surveillance video from inside the store showed Katie being forced out of the store. He had his hands at the back of Katie's neck and was forcing her out of the store. He may have had a cord wrapped around her neck. Police estimated the suspect was in his 20s, 5'10", about 170 pounds, and wearing a New York Yankees jersey. Katie was just over 5 feet tall, with blonde hair, and was wearing slacks and a light-colored top. Throughout the day, authorities widened the search to include I-35 ditches and other woodlands nearby. Busloads of volunteers began a ground search through the dense woods and along deserted roads. Also an air search. Deputies with dogs searched brush and areas near the store. Local police were getting assistance from Carleton County, the Minnesota BCA, and the FBI. Within a few days, then-Governor Jesse Ventura activates the National Guard, and hundreds of volunteers help with the search.
When they say your heart breaks, it literally is breaking. You can feel this emptiness, this pain goes on.
They're actually wanting us just to check ditches.
And the volunteer effort goes on.
Investigators have eyewitness reports from a nearby store the night of Katie's disappearance. A report of a man driving around Moose Lake earlier Wednesday night, the night Katie went missing, staring at women and girls. With this witness, they secure a sketch of the suspect to be released. 10 days into her disappearance, Pam and Steve Poirier sat in their living room, remembering when Katie would have bad dreams, and Pam calmed her by talking about getting candy at the July 4th parade, or when Katie was nervous and started twirling her hair. The Poiriers said they hope their current nightmare soon has a happy ending. "This is the ultimate fear a parent has when their child is born," said Pam. Her parents showed no ill toward her abductor, but they pleaded with him to release her unharmed, adding they want to see her water skiing and fishing with her brother and cousins. Signs of Katie are everywhere in her parents' home. Part of Katie's doll collection was kept in her old room. Her parents pleaded, "I know there is some goodness deep down inside him, if he would just let it come out and just let her go." So far, no sign of Katie, nor the man sought in her disappearance, though she receives massive media coverage and tips. Katie is featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted, and a website is created dedicated on Katie's behalf, named findkatie.com. Detectives had multiple witnesses report a suspicious black pickup truck along with a partial license plate. With this information, investigators are led to a man named Donald Blum. Donald was working at the Minnesota Veterans Home prior to Katie's disappearance, under the name Donald Hutchinson. On June 8th, a former coworker of his called the police tip line and said Donald Hutchinson looked similar to the man in the composite sketch. He said Donald was absent on the day after Katie's abduction, had recently cut his hair, had stopped driving his black pickup truck, and without notice, quit his job. Blum owned a 20-acre property in Moose Lake, 12 miles from the convenience store from which Katie was abducted. He also had an extensive violent history within Minnesota that spanned decades. Blum at this point was a 6-time serious violent sexual offender. Minnesota was furious at the news of Blum's arrest and criminal history once it was released. While Donald was held, he refused to speak with detectives and asked for an attorney. Meanwhile, detectives get warrants to conduct searches for any evidence regarding the disappearance of Katie on any of Donald's properties. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources sent 80 firefighters and 6 supervisors from around the state to help with the search on the properties. Donald's trailer home is 12 miles from the convenience store where Katie was working. Carlton County Sheriff Dave Sabot asked firefighters to search several lakes with soil type that had been collected during the investigation. The soil came from Blum's clothing or vehicles. Human remains were found on his land. Many small bone fragments and teeth were found on his property near Moose Lake. The bone fragments were charred and came from the fire pit. Forensic labs at the Minnesota BCA determined that the burned bone fragments represent many different parts of the body. It is also possible that some of the recovered fragments are not Katie Poirier. Donald Blum said he didn't know whose remains were found on his property, but they are definitely not Katie's remains. As Joe Freedhears, a local defense attorney, said, "You're not supposed to have anybody's bones under your trailer." Evidence obtained in Katie's case includes a chainsaw, a knife, knotted rope, and a fire pit containing bones. Also found was a 55-gallon drum of flammable material similar to fuel oil, as well as a silver hoop earring in a front man's pocket. In an earlier search warrant, authorities said they were looking for a pair of silver hoop earrings, and one single hoop earring was found. But Katie's mother, Pam, said the earring found was not Katie's. Investigators had burnt tooth fragments and some remaining bone fragments that didn't match Katie's identified remains. And also DNA from blondish head hairs found in his pickup truck also did not match Katie Poirier. Searches of his homes in Richfield and rural Carleton County turned up several guns, illegal for him to possess as a convicted felon, and what proved to be human blood. They found newspaper articles mentioning Katie in the upstairs closet. The firearms possession resulted in Blum being charged in federal court as being a felon. After 2 months in prison, on September 8th, Donald tearfully confessed to abducting and killing Katie Poirier, and the remains found on his property were hers. First, however, Donald signaled his willingness to a plea agreement during an interview with the Twin Cities TV station. Soon after, a deal was reached, and Blum called relatives before formally confessing to killing Katie Poirier. His confession was vague, and he referred to Katie as the girl. He said that on May 26th, he had gone fishing and then driven home to Richfield. However, later that evening, he had returned to his Moose Lake property. On the way, he stopped to purchase liquor. He had seen Katie in the store working. He had not known her, but had made a grab for her. He had followed and forced her into his pickup truck. Then he had driven her out to his mobile home.
Blum told investigators after he took Katie Poirier, she was afraid.
Was there something that got your attention that made you think she was scared?
I want to say that now. I'm going to go on.
Okay. Did she cry?
No, not at that time, I don't think. But yeah, I'm sure of it now.
Yeah, did she cry later?
Yeah.
And that Katie Poirier put up a fight at Blum's Moose Lake property.
Well, trying to kick me, I guess.
Okay. Was she hard to manage?
Well, yeah, I suppose, yeah.
Then Blum described how he killed Katie Poirier on his Moose Lake property.
I don't know if it was just a guilt or something or whatever, feeling stupid, but yeah. Choked her and killed her.
Okay. Okay. And yet, yeah, the amount of time frame that's involved there? Where did it all?
No, I think 20 minutes, half hour, brother.
Okay. After that happens, what do you do?
I threw a body in a fire pit. Started firing.
He had choked her from behind, saying it had taken about 20 minutes for Katie to die. He denied raping her. Once he knew she was dead, he had placed her body in the fire pit in a fetal position and then gathered wood and paper to make it burn. Donald soon recanted his confession, and his plea deal was rescinded, saying he falsely confessed. Whether Blum had actually confessed falsely or not would now be for a jury to decide. As authorities prepare to seek first-degree murder charges, the family struggled to accept Blum's revelation that they'll never see Katie again. The horror of the convenience store videotape, the weeks of searching woods and fields for miles, the fading hope, and the arrest and indictment of Donald Blum. Early on, it was hard for Pam to get out of bed, saying, "I'll just sit with the covers over my head. I just didn't care. It even took a lot to dust off my coffee table. Leaving the house was very hard, and if I'd go, I'd want to come right back." She started back on cigarettes, lost 25 pounds, and stopped wearing makeup. How she looked to others became an afterthought. First, she prayed Katie would be found alive. Then she prayed the family would simply get an answer about what happened to her. That prayer was answered with Blum's confession. Throughout, the Poirier family became closer, not taking any day together for granted. The support and compassion of an entire state overwhelmed the family. Several boxes and grocery bags filled with letters, many unopened, fill the kitchen and dining area of their home. The letters come from all over the United States and spots as far away as Europe and Australia. Pam and Steve try to take 2 hours each night to read them. Memories and pictures sustain Pam too. Katie loved French fries with a side of ranch dressing, Cabbage Patch dolls and dresses, dogs and movies, Garth Brooks and Stephen King, Days of Our Lives, and the Green Bay Packers. Pam found it funny how Katie at 5'2" and barely 100 pounds could eat and eat. She rolls her eyes at the memory of Katie's search for the perfect dress for her junior prom. She grows quiet when thinking back to Katie's first days of kindergarten and how hard it was for Katie to leave her. Pam gave Katie a necklace so she knew that her mom was always close. Some of her favorite moments are the silly, quiet moments, like singing and dancing in the aisles of any store to make Katie blush. We're talking on the football weekends when Steve and brother Patrick took over the TV, saying she'd come over and we'd just flop on the bed and we'd just sit and talk. She was so open and sharing with me. And sometimes she shared too much, but that's good. Sometimes Pam would rub Katie's head and braid her hair, adding, sometimes we'd be talking and would just fall asleep in the same bed. Even at 18 years of age, she was still that little girl. Pam always liked murder mysteries. Now she shuts them off. Just the violence of it, it's not entertaining anymore. She'd rather watch a rerun of I Love Lucy or her favorite TV show, Dallas. Pam is frustrated with the system of justice that allowed Donald Blum to be back on the streets years ago, with the plea agreement that has fallen apart, saying, every night at the dinner table, I have an empty spot.
He has a mobile home on property near Moose Lake and a home and family in Richfield. No one around them knew about his record.
Has he ever been in prison?
Oh, yeah.
He has. Ain't that funny?
Minnesota does have a law allowing neighbors to know when there's a convicted sex offender living near them. But Bloom was released 3 months before it went into effect, so he wasn't required to register with the state.
Well, I just keep looking over there. I can't believe it.
Neighbors knew him for being handy and building furniture in his garage. Now they're learning for the first time about his dangerous past.
The trial began in June 2000 and would include over 50 witnesses. Pam is angry Donald's attorneys can't even face her, saying, I want them to look at me and realize we're real. We're not on TV. This is the real thing. Katie and her fiancé Mark have moved in together and were students at community college in Carleton, both intending to become state conservation officers, maybe game wardens in Montana or Wyoming after they were married. He had been working and still intended to return to school, but the game warden thing was done. Mark did not attend the first day of the trial. Upon the Poirier family seeing Blum in court for the first time, the family glared at the man who caused them so much pain. Pam said, I don't know if it was Katie or God, but I wasn't nervous. I had to look evil in the eye, and I did, and he didn't win. Prosecutors had a burnt tooth and human remains that were nearly incinerated, but no DNA evidence linking either to Katie. The remains were burned so badly that forensic experts were unable to make a conclusive link. Though no DNA link was made, the dental work was consistent with Katie's. The tooth and human remains were the strongest piece of evidence in the case. Not really one piece of conclusive evidence in the case, but all these little pieces of evidence piled on top of each other. Without his confession, the case would have been more difficult to prove. Pertler told the jury that the state will prove Blum guilty with the following main elements. The recanted confession, which jurors will listen to. Testimony of the Subway store clerk who identified Blum as the man she saw outside the convenience store an hour before Katie was abducted. She identified his truck, correctly remembering the first 3 characters of his license plate. Other witnesses say they saw Blum's truck cruising Moose Lake that night. The testimony of Blum's coworkers at the Minneapolis Veterans Home, one of whom first tipped police to the possibility that Blum was the kidnapper. They were willing to ID him from the surveillance tape. Coworkers will help establish that Blum had clothes like the kidnapper and that he changed his appearance, stopped driving his truck, quit work abruptly, and did other strange things after the abduction. The testimony of experts, who will say that burned remains were found on his vacation property, were those of a female between ages 16 to 26, and that one of the teeth had dental working, matching Katie's records and x-rays. A taped interview police conducted with Blum when he was arrested about 3 weeks after the abduction. To finish off the trial, the most damning witnesses were 2 of Donald's previous victims. A woman who had searched for Katie and had attended most of the trial told reporters if Katie could have gotten away, this could be her testimony.
What those poor girls had to go through and this scumbag did to them, and then to come here and to tell what he did to me, case closed.
Blum has paled and aged since his arrest. This trial is also beginning to wear down the Poirier family.
Hope it's over soon.
Is it harder than you thought?
Oh, definitely. Reading the confession and then listening to him, that was extremely hard.
The 2 women from Donald's 1983 Stillwater offense had their first chance to face Donald in court, something none of his other previous victims got the chance to do because of Donald taking plea deals. The moment of truth arrived in the vortex of one of the most publicized trials in Minnesota history. Now adult women, their survivors did not look at Donald, though he often looked at them. He seemed bored and watched them with a blank expression. The younger survivor broke into tears and said, "It's still scary." A recess was then called to give her a break to compose herself. She returned to give her testimony. Donald was hitchhiking and they picked him up. They said he was chatting, and he said he was a surgeon before pulling a knife, taking over the wheel, and ordering the girls onto the floor, out of sight. Later, he locked the 16-year-old girl in the trunk of the car before driving to a secluded road where he parked, then forced them into the woods. If one of them tried to run away, he would say he would kill the other girl. If they fought, he would get angry and choke them from behind, like he had admitted to doing to Katie Poirier in his confession. At the time of the 1983 Stillwater attack, the 16-year-old girl was 5'6", 115 pounds, with blonde hair, while the 15-year-old was 5'2" and 110 pounds. The prosecution pointed out earlier how Donald liked his victims petite. Katie Poirier was 5'2" and 115 pounds. Jurors felt the enormity of the case during deliberation. The first vote, jurors cast 11 votes for a guilty verdict, with only one juror not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. Blum's 2-hour tape confession sealed his fate for most jurors. But after another 90 minutes, the last juror came around. After 10.5 hours of deliberations, the vote was unanimous. The jury found Donald Blum guilty of first-degree murder of Katie Poirier. After they left the courtroom, the jurors rushed to their cars and drove away with no comment, having just concluded one of the highest-profile murder cases in Minnesota history. Blum dressed in casual slacks and shirt and tie and showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He carried on a whispered conversation with his attorney both before and after the announcement. Having just been dealt his 5th conviction involving the abduction of teenage girls, Blum shrugged slightly. As a clerk read the guilty verdict, a collective gasp went up in the courtroom from about 60 of Katie's family and friends. Mark Johnson, Katie's fiancé, made it to the courtroom for the first time since the trial began to see Donald get convicted. They pinned ribbons to their shirts in honor of Katie, the same yellow and gold ribbons that those searching for Katie wore last summer.
I don't know when it was that I've had a night's sleep without taking something to help.
I understand that they have a good newspaper in the prisons. I would like to get a good splash and tell them that who's coming to visit them, give them a little welcoming committee.
Deep sadness punctuated by moments of anger, hostility toward the legal system, and especially toward Donald Blum. That was the tone in court today when the Poiriers told Donald Blum what his crime had done to them. Pam Poirier told Blum, "Get a good look at me. I want my face in your dreams." Blum's defense objected. Pam Poirier said to Brodeen, "Give it a rest. It's my turn now." The audience applauded. Donald Blum said, "This is expletive. You've got the wrong expletive guy." Blum leaps out of his seat, is subdued, and taken away. Pam Poirier says, "Say hi to Bubba for me." There's more applause, and Donald Blum says, "Stick it up your expletive." The judge cleared the courtroom. Throughout the morning, he cut off the Poiriers' criticism of defense counsel.
To be cut off like that, we didn't get a chance. And
part of the impact statement should be the justice system, the defense lawyers, the prosecution, everything. Not just that we cry every night and we miss her.
Donald Blum received a life sentence for killing Katie. The Poirier family began to pick up the pieces and look toward the future. More than 1,200 mourners filled the high school gym to pay respects to Katie and to bear a call on action on behalf of women and the vulnerable. Katie was described as loving, family-oriented, funny, mischievous, and now at peace. With the dominant theme of the service being light over darkness and a call against violence.
Never again! Never again! Separate tragedies have helped bring these people together. They are united, however, in their determination to make Minnesota a safer place. They support Katie's Law, which is an effort to close the loopholes in our criminal justice system, which allow violent people to walk free and re-offend.
This is awesome. This is a huge statement of support of trying to find some solutions, you know? This is not a single response to Donald Blum, one guy. This is all the good people in the world are saying, let's stop,
Katie Poirier's grandfather agrees.
Let's hope that everybody in the old Capitol sees it and we can push everything through. I think this shows that it's a statewide.
The family sharply criticized the justice system for freeing the repeat sex offender who killed her. Pam Poirier asked volunteers who helped search for Katie to now start lobbying to make sure convicted felons aren't freed early. Pam became a force for crime prevention laws at the Minnesota legislature. She joined forces with Connie Larson and Patty Wetterling, the mothers of Callie Jo Larson and Jacob Wetterling, who were victims of other highly publicized crimes in Minnesota. The Katie Poirier Abduction Task Force, law enforcement officers, and families of crime victims helped get a passage of a measure dubbed Katie's Law to tighten registration of sex offenders and link law enforcement computers to improve tracking of criminals. A bill to require surveillance cameras in convenience stores stalled in the legislature. Tougher laws were sparked by several highly publicized cases throughout Minnesota history. Those cases were 2 parking ramp rapes in 1988 by men with a history of sexual violence, and the abduction of Jacob Wetterling in 1989. In terms of laws specifically in Minnesota that could have protected Katie Poirier from a man like Donald Blum, he was released from his last offense before any serious protective laws were in place. By mid-1989, pattern sex offenders had just begun to receive longer sentences. In 1991, sex offenders began registering their addresses with authorities. In 1992, probation officer supervision of released repeat sexual offenders was increased up to 10 years longer than under previous law. In 1994, indefinite civil commitments of sexually dangerous offenders, which I cover in episode 4, with the case of 14-year-old Barbara Iverson. In January 1997, authorities began notifying communities where certain released sex offenders will live. In 2000, Katie's Law. The loopholes Donald Blum has walked through have been closed. The Poirier family knew more tough times were ahead. The next Christmas, the next birthday, the next trip to the Twin Cities, the funeral service that will take place once Katie's remains are secured. Katie was laid to rest along the grave of her grandmother. Pam still finds herself stopping and glancing at the back door of her home, hoping Katie will walk through. Marvin Rapinski shared, as the pastor who presided at the wedding of Steve and Pam Poirier at the United Methodist Church in Duluth, and as the officiant minister who baptized their daughter Katie, I offer a reminder of the larger history. Some months before Katie's abduction from a convenience store in the Moose Lake area, I had spent time with the Poirier family. I still have photographs I took of this beautiful, smiling, energetic, and trusting young woman. Now gone. Only ashes. Why? The public needs to be reminded of the predatory behavior of Mr. Blum. During the trial, some of the witnesses and evidence were excluded. We know of the 15 aliases used by Mr. Blum in his career that seemed to be made up of lies, manipulation, and conflicted behavior. During the trial, family and friends stayed at a hotel and restaurant complex. I think of conversations while sitting around a large table with family members on one of these days. I recall persons so incensed over Blum's damaging, frightening years of behavior. These persons were some of the persons who in their young adult years were assaulted by Mr. Blum. The pain of assault was still present in the terrifying memories. The next 2 episodes will be covering the victims and supposed victims of Donald Blum, other evidence obtained from his properties, the defense side of Katie's trial, and an in-depth look on just how horrific his crimes were before Minnesota even knew who he was publicly in 1999. Donald has since passed away while serving his sentence and took every other case unsolved to his grave. Katie's brother Patrick said it best. It's not a victory for us, but it was a victory for the state of Minnesota, because now all your children can be safe from this one man. Thank you to the Poirier family for sharing Katie with Minnesota. Please return for episode 8, where I'll be taking an in-depth look into the life and crimes of Donald Blum and the nameless other remains and Katie Poirier's evidence. Rest in peace, Katie Poirier.